50 Comanche warriors on horseback. That's what Elijah Morgan saw cresting the hill at sunrise, their war paint gleaming in the morning light. But 12 hours earlier, he had no idea that saving one dying girl would put his entire world on the edge of destruction. The evening before, Elijah was checking his cattle near the creek when he heard a soft whimper barely audible over the flowing water. For a man who'd lived alone for 8 years, any human sound was unusual. But this wasn't just any sound, it was the sound of someone dying. He found her collapsed behind a cluster of mesquite bushes, blood pooling beneath her small frame. A Comanche girl, maybe 16, with a bullet wound in her shoulder and fever burning through her body. Her breathing was shallow, desperate. Elijah's first instinct was to walk away. The smart thing, the safe thing helping a Comanche could mean death for a white man in these parts. But something in her face stopped him. Maybe it was how young she looked, or how her fingers clutched a small wooden pendant, the same way his daughter used to hold her doll when she was scared. Sarah would have been about this age now, if she'd lived. Elijah knelt beside the girl, checking her wound. The bullet had gone clean through, but infection was setting in fast. She needed help immediately, or she'd be dead by morning. He looked around the empty landscape, knowing he was probably the only person within 50 miles who could save her. That's when he made the decision that would change everything. He lifted her carefully, feeling how light she was, how fragile. Her eyes fluttered open for just a moment, dark, frightened eyes that reminded him too much of his own daughter's last moments. Then she was unconscious again, her body limp in his arms. Elijah carried her to his small cabin, his mind racing. He'd built this place to escape the world, to forget the past. Now he was bringing the most dangerous kind of trouble right to his doorstep. But as he laid her on his bed and began cleaning the wound, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. He worked through the night using skills his wife had taught him years ago. Cleaning, stitching, fighting the fever with cool water and whiskey. The girl drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes murmuring words in Comanche he couldn't understand. By dawn, her fever had broken. She was going to live. But as Elijah stepped outside to check on his horses, he saw them, a line of warriors on the horizon, moving slowly but deliberately toward his land. Even from a distance, he could see the war paint, the weapons, the unmistakable intent in their formation. They weren't just looking for the girl, they were coming for him. The girl's eyes snapped open the moment Elijah stepped back inside. She saw him and immediately tried to scramble away, but her wounded shoulder sent her crashing back onto the bed with a sharp cry of pain. "Easy there," Elijah said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "You're safe." But her terrified expression told him she understood enough English to know that safety was relative. A Comanche girl in a white man's cabin was anything but safe, especially with 50 warriors approaching. She spoke rapidly in her native tongue, pointing toward the door with her good arm. Elijah caught one word he recognized: father. Then she said something that made his blood run cold. Even without understanding Comanche, the urgency in her voice was unmistakable. They were both in serious trouble. Elijah moved to the window and peered through the gap in the shutters. The warriors had stopped about 200 yards away, forming a line across his property. They weren't attacking yet, but they weren't leaving either. In the center of the formation, one man sat taller than the rest, clearly their leader, probably the girl's father. "They think I took you." Elijah said, more to himself than to her. "They think I'm holding you prisoner." The girl struggled to sit up, and this time he helped her, supporting her back against the wooden headboard. She was beautiful, in the way wild things are beautiful, fierce and untamed, with intelligent eyes that seemed to see straight through him. But right now, those eyes were filled with fear. She pointed to herself and said, "Ayanna." Then she pointed to him, a question in her expression, "Elijah." He replied. It was the first time he'd said his own name aloud in months. Ayanna nodded, then struggled to find English words. "My father," she began, then switched back to Comanche, speaking faster now, more desperately. Elijah didn't need a translation. He understood the situation perfectly. Chief Dakota had probably been searching for his daughter all night. Finding her in a white man's cabin would look like kidnapping, rape, or worse. The fact that Elijah had actually saved her life wouldn't matter not to 50 armed warriors who'd seen too many white men do terrible things to their people. A voice boomed across the distance, deep, commanding, speaking in Comanche. Ayanna's face went pale. "What's he saying?" Elijah asked. Ayanna looked at him with something that might have been pity. "He says you have 1 hour, bring me out, or they burn everything." Elijah felt his chest tighten. An hour, 60 minutes, to figure out how to explain this situation to warriors who had every reason to distrust him, in a language he didn't speak with a girl who could barely stand. But the real problem wasn't the language barrier or the time limit. The real problem was that Ayanna was trying to tell him something else, something that made her eyes wide with terror. And whatever it was about to make this situation infinitely worse. Ayanna grabbed Elijah's wrist with surprising strength, her fingers digging into his skin as she struggled to find the English words. Not my father," she whispered, her voice shaking. Elijah's blood went cold. "What Dakota he?" She pressed her hand to her wounded shoulder, then made a gesture that looked like shooting. "He did this." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Elijah stared at her, trying to process what she was telling him. The chief outside wasn't here to rescue his daughter. He was here to finish what he'd started. Why, Elijah asked, though he wasn't sure she'd understand. Ayanna's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. I saw him kill white family, woman, children. He say I tell no one, but I..." She touched the pendant around her neck. "I cannot stay quiet." Elijah felt sick. This wasn't a rescue mission, it was an execution. Dakota had shot his own daughter to keep her silent about a massacre, and now he'd tracked her here to finish the job. The 50 warriors outside weren't just looking for their chief's daughter. They were looking for a witness who could destroy them all. "That's why you were alone," Elijah said, understanding flooding through him. "You were running from him." Ayanna nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. I thought I could reach Fort Tell's soldiers." But she gestured weakly at her shoulder. The voice outside boomed again, closer this time. Elijah looked through the window and saw that some of the warriors had moved forward. They were losing patience. "What's he saying now?" Elijah asked. Ayanna listened, her face growing paler. "He tells them you are the one who shot me. He says you took me to hurt me." They believe him. Of course they did. Dakota was their chief, their leader. Why would they question his word against a white stranger's? Elijah realized with growing horror that he wasn't just harboring a wounded girl. He was harboring the only witness to a war crime. And the perpetrator was right outside his door with an army. "There's something else," Ayanna whispered, her voice barely audible. "The family he killed?" They were not alone. Elijah's heart hammered against his ribs. "What do you mean?" "There were other families." "Dakota, She struggled with the English, then gave up and spoke rapidly in Comanche, gesturing frantically. But Elijah didn't need a translation this time. The terror in her eyes told him everything. This wasn't about one massacre. This was about multiple families, multiple murders. And Ayanna was the only person alive who could expose it all. The voice outside grew louder, more demanding. Elijah could hear horses moving, weapons being readied. That's when Ayanna said the words that changed everything. "He knows you heard me talking. He knows you know." Elijah's mouth went dry. Dakota wasn't just here to silence his daughter anymore. The sound of hoofbeats circling the cabin made Elijah's skin crawl. They were being surrounded, cut off from any escape route. Through the window, he could see warriors positioning themselves strategically. Some near the barn, others by the well, all of them armed and ready. Ayanna struggled to stand, clutching the wooden bedpost for support. "I go out," she said, her voice weak but determined. "I tell them I ran here. You not hurt me." "They'll kill you the moment you step outside," Elijah said flatly. "And then they'll kill me. Better than both of us die here." Elijah shook his head. The girl had courage, he'd give her that. But she didn't understand what they were really facing. "Ayanna, if Dakota's been killing families and covering it up, he can't let either of us live. We're witnesses, we know too much." The truth of it hung between them like a death sentence. Dakota had painted himself into a corner. He couldn't let his daughter live to expose his crimes, and he couldn't let Elijah live to repeat what he'd heard. The only solution was to kill them both and claim the white man had murdered his daughter. A new voice called out from outside, younger, speaking in broken English. "White man Chief Dakota. He want to talk. You come out, bring girl. We no hurt you." Elijah almost laughed at the absurdity. No hurt you, when 50 warriors had them surrounded and their leader was a murderer. But then he noticed something in the young warrior's voice. Uncertainty, maybe even doubt. "That's Kiyoshi," Ayanna whispered. "He is good man. He not know what Dakota do." An idea began forming in Elijah's mind. A desperate, probably suicidal idea, but maybe their only chance. How many of them know the truth about what Dakota's been doing? Just him, maybe 1-2 others? The rest, Ayanna shook her head. "They think he protect our people from whites. They not know he kill innocent ones." That was it. That was their only shot. If most of the warriors didn't know about Dakota's crimes, maybe they could be turned. Maybe they'd listen to reason if they knew their chief was lying to them. But first, Elijah had to figure out how to communicate with 50 armed men who probably wanted him dead. He moved to his gun rack and pulled down his rifle, checking the chamber. 6 shots against 50 warriors. The mathematics were not encouraging. "What you do?" Ayanna asked, fear creeping back into her voice. "Something stupid," Elijah replied. He walked to the door, his hand on the latch. "But maybe stupid enough to work." "No," Ayanna grabbed his arm. "They kill you." Elijah looked at her. This brave girl who'd risked everything to expose the truth, who was still trying to protect him, even though she could barely stand. She reminded him so much of Sarah, of the daughter he'd failed to save 8 years ago. He wasn't going to fail again. "Listen to me," he said, turning to face her. "When I go out there, I'm going to tell them the truth, all of it. About what Dakota did, about what you saw. Some of them might believe me. And if they not believe," Elijah checked his rifle one more time, "then we make our stand here." He reached for the door, but Ayanna's next words stopped him cold. "Elijah, there's something else I not tell you about the families Dakota kill." The way she said it made his blood freeze. Whatever she was about to reveal, it was worse than everything she'd already told him. And they were about to run out of time to do anything about it. Ayanna's voice dropped to a whisper, each word hitting Elijah like a physical blow. The families, one of them, had children, little ones. Dakota, he'd tell the warriors, they were killed by soldiers. But I saw him do it himself. Elijah's knees nearly buckled. Children, Dakota hadn't just murdered families. He'd butchered innocent children and blamed it on the army. Then he'd use those deaths to justify more violence, more raids, more bloodshed. How many children, Elijah asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. 3 2 boys, 1 girl. The girl, she was maybe 6 years old. Ayanna's voice broke. She called for her mama when she couldn't finish. She didn't have to. Elijah understood exactly what kind of monster they were dealing with. The voice outside called again, more insistent now. Time was running out. He keeps the scalps. Ayanna continued, her words tumbling out in a desperate rush hidden in his lodge. He shows them to warriors, tells them it proved white soldiers kill our people. But I know the truth. Elijah felt rage building in his chest, not just at Dakota, but at the whole Sikh situation. Those warriors outside weren't evil men. They were being manipulated, lied to, turned into weapons by a chief who was using their grief and anger to cover his own crimes. If I could prove it to them, Elijah said slowly, if I could make them see what Dakota really is. They never believe white man over their chief. Ayanna said never. But Elijah was already thinking, planning. What if it wasn't coming from a white man? What if it was coming from you? Ayanna stared at him. I am wounded, weak, and I am just girl. They not listen. They'll listen if you can prove it. Elijah moved to the window, studying the warriors outside. Most of them looked young, probably following Dakota out of loyalty and trust. Tell me about Kiyoshi, the one who spoke English. Is he honorable? Yes, he is my cousin. He would never hurt innocent people. Then we talked to him first. Elijah was forming a plan now, desperate and dangerous. But maybe their only chance. We tell him the truth, all of it. If he believes you, he never believed such things about Dakota. He will, if you show him the proof. Ayanna looked confused. What proof? Elijah pointed to her pendant, the small wooden carving she'd been clutching when he found her. That belonged to one of the children, didn't it? Her face went white. How you know? Because you said you couldn't stay quiet because you're wearing their blood on your conscience, just like I've been wearing my family's. Elijah's voice was gentle but firm. That's why you were running, not just because you witnessed the murders, but because Dakota made you take something from the scene, something to implicate you. The sound of horses moving closer interrupted them. Elijah could hear Dakota's voice now, speaking rapidly in Comanche. Whatever he was telling his warriors, it was making them agitated. He's telling them, I've hurt you. Ayanna translated, tears streaming down her face. He says, I'm probably already dead. That's when they heard the war cry, 50 voices raised in unison, filled with rage and the promise of violence. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew about justice and revenge in the Old West. But Elijah had one more question for Ayanna, and her answer would determine whether they lived through the next 5 minutes. Can you ride? Elijah asked urgently. Ayanna tested her wounded shoulder, wincing at the movement little bit. Why? Because we're not going out there to talk. Elijah moved quickly to his gun cabinet, pulling out ammunition and a second rifle. We're going to the one place Dakota can't follow us with his lies. Where Fort Davidson? Fort, it's 20 miles east. Elijah handed her the smaller rifle, checking to make sure she could hold it. If we can get there alive, you can tell your story to the commanding officer. He'll investigate. And when they find those scalps in Dakota's lodge, Ayanna's eyes widened with understanding. But then fear crept back in. 20 miles through open country, with 50 warriors hunting us. We've got one advantage they don't know about. Elijah moved to the back wall of his cabin and pulled aside a wooden panel, revealing a hidden door. This leads to a tunnel I dug during Apache raids 3 years ago. Comes out in the ravine behind the ridge. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for one person, and led downward into darkness. It wasn't comfortable, but it would get them past the warriors undetected. My horses are in a hidden corral down there, Elijah continued. We can be 5 miles away before they realize we're gone. Ayanna looked at the tunnel, then back at him. And then even if we reach Fort, who believed Comanche girl over war chief. Someone who knew those families. Elijah's voice was grim. I recognize the description you gave of the children, the Hendersons. They were traveling through here 2 weeks ago. Man, woman, 3 kids heading to Oregon Territory. I sold them supplies. The war cries outside were getting louder, more urgent. Dakota was working his warriors into a killing frenzy. If those were the Hendersons, Elijah continued, then Captain Morrison at the fort knew them too. They stopped there first, registered their travel plans. When they never arrived in Oregon, he probably figured they died of disease or accident. But if you tell him they were murdered, he investigate. He'll have to, especially when you show him that pendant. Ayanna looked down at the wooden carving in her hand. Elijah was right. It wasn't Comanche work. The style was too different, too delicate. It was something a white child would own, would treasure. The sound of splintering wood came from the front door. They were out of time. Go, Elijah said, pushing her toward the tunnel. I'll be right behind you. Ayanna dropped to her knees and crawled into the narrow space, her wounded shoulders screaming in protest. Behind her, she could hear Elijah gathering supplies, water, ammunition, anything they might need for the desperate ride ahead. The front door exploded inward just as Elijah disappeared into the tunnel behind her. Voices filled the cabin, angry, confused, searching. Dakota's voice rose above the rest, shouting orders in Comanche. They crawled through the darkness, dirt falling around them, the tunnel seeming to stretch on forever. Ayanna's shoulder was bleeding again, leaving a trail behind them. But she forced herself to keep moving. Then she heard something that made her blood freeze. Dakota's voice much closer than it should have been. Elijah, she whispered back. I think they found the tunnel. But when she looked back, she couldn't see him anymore. The darkness had swallowed him completely, and the voices behind them were getting closer. Ayanna emerged from the tunnel, gasping, her shoulder on fire with pain. The hidden corral was exactly where Elijah had said it would be, a small clearing protected by rocks and brush with 2 horses already saddled and waiting. But Elijah wasn't behind her. She turned back to the tunnel entrance, listening for sounds of movement. Nothing but silence. Then she heard gunshots, echoing from the direction of the cabin, followed by shouts in Comanche. Her heart sank. Either Elijah was dead, or he was trapped. Ayanna looked at the horses, then back at the tunnel. Every instinct told her to run, to take one of the horses, and ride hard for Fort Davidson. She had the evidence. She had the story. She could expose Dakota's crimes and bring justice for those murdered families. But she couldn't leave Elijah behind, not after what he'd done for her. She was still trying to decide when she heard footsteps in the tunnel, heavy, moving fast. Someone was coming. Ayanna grabbed the smaller rifle Elijah had given her, and I aimed it at the tunnel entrance, her hands shaking. A figure emerged into the dim light, covered in dirt and blood. Elijah. Thought I told you to ride? He said, wincing as he stood. Thought you were dead, she replied, lowering the rifle. Close enough. He showed her a graze along his ribs, where a bullet had torn through his shirt. They found the tunnel entrance, but I collapsed part of it behind me. Bought us maybe 10 minutes before they dig through or find another way around. Elijah helped her onto one of the horses, then swung up onto the other. Can you hold on for 20 miles? Ayanna nodded, though she wasn't sure it was true. The blood loss and pain were making her dizzy, but determination kept her upright. They rode hard through the ravine, keeping low to avoid being seen from the ridge above. The horses were fresh and fast, but Ayanna could already hear the sound of pursuit. War cries and hoofbeats echoing off the canyon walls. They're coming, she called out to Elijah. I know he pointed ahead to where the ravine opened onto a vast plain. Once we're out there, it's open country for 15 miles, no place to hide. It would be a race pure and simple. 2 riders on good horses against 50 warriors who knew this territory like their own heartbeat. They burst from the ravine at full gallop, the morning sun blazing down on the endless grassland ahead. Behind them, Ayanna could see the first Comanche riders emerging from the canyon, spreading out in a wide formation to cut off any escape routes. "Faster," Elijah shouted, but Ayanna's horse was already at its limit. That's when she saw them ahead, a dust cloud on the horizon, moving in their direction. At first she thought it was more Comanche warriors, and her heart nearly stopped. But then Elijah began shouting something that sounded almost like joy. "Blue uniforms," he called out. "It's a cavalry patrol." Salvation was ahead of them, but the warriors behind them were gaining ground fast, and Ayanna was starting to slide from her saddle as darkness crept in from the edges of her vision. The cavalry patrol was closer than it had appeared. 12 soldiers riding in formation, led by a captain whose weathered face showed years of frontier experience. When they saw 2 riders being chased by a war party, they immediately formed a defensive line and raised their rifles. "Hold your fire," Elijah shouted as they approached. "We need protection, not a battle." "Captain Morrison." Ayanna recognized him from Elijah's description, held up his hand to stop his men from shooting. "State your business, civilian." "This girl has information about the Henderson family murders," Elijah called out, helping Ayanna stay upright in her saddle. "She's a witness to war crimes." Behind them, the Comanche warriors had stopped about 200 yards away, clearly reluctant to engage a well-armed cavalry unit. But Dakota was visible among them, his face twisted with rage as he realized his prey was slipping away. Captain Morrison's expression changed completely at the mention of the Hendersons. "Sergeant, defensive positions, and get the medic. That girl's bleeding." He rode closer to Elijah and Ayanna. "The Hendersons were friends of mine." "What do you know about their deaths?" Ayanna struggled to speak, her voice weak but clear. "Chief Dakota, he killed them and others. I saw it happen." "That's a serious accusation, miss." "She has proof," Elijah said, pointing to the pendant around her neck. "That belonged to one of the Henderson children." Morrison examined the wooden carving, his face growing darker. "This is Emily Henderson's. She showed it to me when they stopped at the fort. Her grandmother carved it." He looked back at Ayanna with new intensity. "Are you telling me Dakota murdered that entire family?" "Yes, and he has scalps hidden in his lodge to make warriors think soldiers did it. He uses their anger to cover his crimes." One of the Comanche warriors was riding forward now. The young man Ayanna had called Kiyoshi. He approached slowly, hands visible, clearly wanting to talk rather than fight. "Captain," he called out in careful English, "my chief says the white man stole our medicine woman's daughter, says he hurt her." Morrison looked between Kiyoshi and Ayanna, then at the blood staining her clothes. "Is that true, miss? Did this man harm you?" "No." Ayanna's voice was stronger now, fueled by determination. "He saved my life. Dakota shot me when I tried to tell truth about the murders." Kiyoshi's face went pale. He spoke rapidly in Comanche to Ayanna, and she responded in the same language. Morrison watched the exchange, noting how the young warrior's expression changed from confusion to horror to rage. "What's she telling him?" Morrison asked Elijah. "The truth about what Dakota really is." Kiyoshi wheeled his horse around and rode back to the war party. They could see him talking urgently with the other warriors, gesturing toward Dakota. Several of the warriors began arguing among themselves. "Looks like not everyone's as loyal to your chief," as he thought, Morrison said grimly. Suddenly, Dakota broke from the group and charged toward them alone, his war cry echoing across the plain. But he wasn't heading for the soldiers. He was heading straight for Ayanna. Morrison's rifle cracked, and Dakota tumbled from his horse, hitting the ground hard and rolling to a stop just yards away. The war chief tried to raise his weapon, but Captain Morrison was already standing over him. Chief Dakota Morrison said formally, "You're under arrest for the murder of the Henderson family and conspiracy to incite warfare through false testimony." Dakota spat blood and spoke in Comanche, his words filled with defiance. "He says you have no proof," Ayanna translated weakly. Morrison smiled grimly. "Tell him we'll find those scalps he's been hiding. And when we do, his own people will know what kind of monster they've been following." 3 weeks later, Ayanna stood in the courtroom at Fort Davidson, strong enough now to testify. The scalps had been found exactly where she said they would be. Dakota's remaining supporters had abandoned him when the evidence was presented. Justice had been served, but the cost had been high. Trust between the tribes and the army would take years to rebuild. As for Elijah, he never did return to his isolated cabin. Some said he'd moved east, looking for a fresh start. Others claimed they'd seen him helping other travelers in need along the frontier trails. Ayanna knew the truth. Some acts of compassion change everything, not just for the person receiving help, but for the person brave enough to offer it when the stakes are highest. Now, click on the video on the screen, because the next story carries something you can't explain, only feel. And when it ends, you won't be the same. Click on the video now.